Hi, my name is DrAlanBarnard. I'm CEO of Goldratt Research Labs. And in our lab, we focus on decision making, trying to understand why good people make and often repeat bad decisions. Well, the first big insight is that in real world conditions where there's lots of VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, capacity, constraints, and ambiguity of competing objectives, it's really easy to make bad decisions. I was recently asked, well, you spend a lot of time to try and find what is the most optimum way of scheduling a group of work. That could be for a production environment or project environment. Does it really matter how we create a schedule? Is the resulting capacity constraints that we've got not just going to dictate it in execution, how schedules can be completed, and it's not so important how we do the schedules or the plans, and it's much more important to focus on execution. And it reminded me of a really intriguing example that Dr. Eli Goldratt shared in his book, The Race. He published it in 1986, shortly after he had published the Goal. And it was the first case study that he showed how the insights that was shared in the Goal of how important it is to consider capacity constraints when you are building a schedule using the drum buffer road methodology and production environment, how those same insights also applies to a project environment, and how the same mistakes that is made in material requirement planning systems, MRP, are also made in project planning and execution systems. So I thought it might be useful with this video to remind you of that example and to show you what a big difference it can make when you are building a schedule that not only considers capacity constraints, but actually allocates them in the most optimum possible way. So I'm going to be sharing my screen. I'll share it in an Excel spreadsheet that I've built. For those that are interested in getting a copy of this example, you're welcome to email me at alan@Goldratt Research Lab or direct message me, and I'll share with you this example. So here's the example that Dr. Eli included in the race. It's a project environment. So there's a 3 projects or phases that have to be completed. You can see from this chart, there's a phase A, which starts with a procurement task that takes 50 days. And then there's a second task called A10 that is a 60-day task, and it's done by Team V. And once that has been completed, you can then complete that phase or sub-project by task A20, which only takes 5 days, and that's done by Team W. Team V is all the blue tasks, Team W is all the green tasks. Of course, you can only complete the project once all 3 of these phases or sub-projects have been completed. I've shown you some basic calculations. You can see my critical path. The longest path here is this phase A or sub-project A is 115 days long. The others have got significant slack, 105 days and 100 days. And for those that are interested to know, well, where's the bottleneck, which resource is most loaded here, I can see Team V is loaded to 90 days and Team W is loaded to 80 days. So most likely Team V would be the bottleneck. Now, Dr. Goldratt asked a couple of interesting questions in this example. He said, considering the structure, this interdependencies and the capacity constraints that you have, can you actually complete this within the time that you've committed to a customer, which is 150 days? Now you can see here our critical path is 115 days. So the real question I was asking is, if we considered our capacity constraints, clearly I can't do all the blue tasks together. I have only one Team V, and the same with Team W. I have only one Team W. How much longer is the critical chain going to be compared to the critical path? So the critical chain is the longest path after we've considered resource contention and we've actually resolved it. So that's the first question, is can we do it within this 150 days? The second part is, when should we order the raw materials so that we're not stuck with the raw materials for a very long time? That could be equipment or something else. We want to reduce the amount of inventory days that we've got. So when is the last day that we can order the raw materials so it doesn't delay the project and this commitment that we've made of 150 days? And then if the materials, of course, do all arrive on time, and these tasks actually do take 60 days and 25 and 5, etc., can we deliver it on time? And also, does it matter whether we resolve the resource contention looking backwards or forwards doesn't really matter. So let's just convert this first into a Gantt chart so you can see what we're dealing with here. So you can see if we convert that into a Gantt chart, all the procurement times are 50 days long. So there's no real difference there. And then if we ignored capacity constraints, we can do all three of these phases or projects, sub-projects at the same time. And it looks like we'll be able to complete it in 115 days. But what they asked us, we want to minimize the time that we are sitting with this inventory. So we want to order it as late as possible. So if your scheduling engine, whether you're doing production or projects, did not consider capacity constraints when building the schedule, you would think that the schedule is viable. What you would then do is you would back schedule from 150 backwards to see when's the last time that you can order the materials for phase A, B, and C. And you can see here, back scheduling from day 150, I'd have to order material A at time on day 35, B at day 45, and C at day 50. But of course, this is not a viable schedule because we've ignored the fact that we have only one team V and one team W. So what would happen in execution if we actually going to follow this plan now? Let's see what will happen in execution. Well, we'll order the materials on days 35, 45, and 50 as we plan to do. They all arrive on time. As soon as material A arrives, I can start this project A or phase A. I'll do my blue task that will take me 60 days and then continue by completing the green task by team W for 5 days. I can only start task B10 with team V once I've completed task A10. And you can see what's now happening is I've turned something, team W, that wasn't a bottleneck into a bottleneck. It's actually the project is now waiting for team W to become available. So I thought I could easily finish it on time 150. It's now going to take 245 days. And I'm carrying the inventory on average here for 202 days. So what would have happened if we had a software that could build a schedule and acknowledge the capacity constraints and see, is it possible to actually achieve the 150? So let's look at the next scenario and see what would have happened if we had actually accepted that. If we back schedule and we are going to give here priority to the critical path when we back scheduling. So we're going to finish 820, then start 810, and then go backwards to the procurement side. I can see that this is the schedule I would have been able to come up with. And actually, I could have completed it in the 150 days that I've committed to. And the latest I could order my raw materials so that the raw materials is not causing any avoidable delays is at time 35, same as before, materials for A. At day 10, I would have to place the order for materials for B, and then at day 5, I would have to place the orders for C. Now, what's very interesting here is when you looking forward now, you can see actually we're starting with the least critical path. We're giving priority to order C first, then start with C10 and then C20. Then we're doing B and then A, which is kind of counterintuitive. It's the exact opposite to the priority that we would have probably selected if our scheduling engine started looking forward, basically resolving the resource contention going forward in time rather than what we're doing here, which is backward in time. So just in summary here, we can in fact get these 3 phases or projects done within the 150 days that we've committed to the client. We've got a buffer of 5 days because the critical chain is actually 145 days long. The critical path was 115. Now the critical chain, which considered the dependencies because of resource constraints, is 145, and we're carrying the inventory only 133 days. But you might ask, well, what would have happened if our scheduling software did not have the ability to resolve resource contention looking backwards from a date that we've committed to, but only starting from today looking forward? And that's where it gets really interesting. So let's look at that schedule. So here's our 145-day schedule, but let's look at what would have happened if we had resolved the resource contention going forwards in time. So now we're starting with procuring A on day 0. It comes in at day 50, so then we can start A10 and then complete A20. We can only start B10 once A10 has been completed, and so continue. And then we can back schedule to see when we have to order B, the materials for B and C. But you can see here, I've gone from 145-day critical chain to a 210-day critical chain. That's a huge increase, not quite double, but kind of 2/3 more than what the theoretical best was, just because of the way that I've resolved the resource contention. And I'm not sure that most practitioners in project environments know how big of an impact it can make, depending on how we are resolving the resource contention and the priorities in which we are resolving that resource contention. And Dr. Goldratt highlighted in this example that this is a very good illustration of what he had codified as a sort of global optima rules, 9 rules for achieving flow in an environment, synchronized flow. He said that rule 9 stated that schedules should be established by looking at all of the constraints simultaneously. Lead times are the result of a schedule and cannot be predetermined. You can't have lead time as an input to your schedule. It is an output of the schedule. And just to show the point here is you can look at various options. And of course, the more paths you have, the more tasks you have, the more resources you have, the more options or permutations there are to resolve resource contention. Here, I've just explored 6 of them because we've got 2 resource types and 3 paths. So that gives me the 6 options I've had to look at. My option 0 is my baseline. That, of course, I ignored the resource contention. So option 1 was if I resolved it by giving phase A or project A the highest priority, that's going to get me a critical chain of 160 days. This is ignoring that 50 days of the procurement because they're all the same for the 3 phases, so it doesn't really matter. So 160 days, whereas the best one is 95 days, which is, as I mentioned, quite counterintuitively, giving phase C, project C, the highest priority, starting with that one first and actually doing a critical path latest. But that's the way that gives me the ability to best exploit my bottleneck resource, which is team V, and not cause team W, a non-bottleneck resource, to cause any major delays. There's only a small delay of 5 days at the end because I need to finish off that phase A. And the difference between these two, if I compare the worst schedule and the best schedule, as I mentioned, 68% longer. Now, if you have scheduling software, and unfortunately, most scheduling software don't explicitly tell you how they are resolving resource contention. If they do actually do that, are they doing it looking backwards from a committed due date backwards, or are they doing it forward? And if they're doing it forwards or backwards, what's the priorities system that they're using? That's normally a black box. You wouldn't know. They just give you an answer and you have no idea how close that answer is to the optimum schedule. What we do in our project portfolio digital twin is essentially we are exploring all the options. Today with technology, we can calculate, the schedules for all the options and come back with the best option. But we can also show you how the best option, how much of a difference it makes to the worst option. And sometimes there's very little difference. But even in the simple case, there was a huge difference, 68% difference. So if you had scheduling software that resolved the resource contention going forward and using the critical path as the highest priority to start with that one first, you would have had a very much a suboptimum schedule. Just as a reminder for those that can't remember these global optima rules for flow versus the local optima rules, I've included them in this little spreadsheet, 9 rules each. And you can see rule 9 is dealing with schedules. So the global optima rule says schedules should be established by looking at all of the constraints simultaneously. Lead time are the result of a schedule and cannot be predetermined, whereas the traditional conventional way, based on the fact that the only way to reach global optima is by ensuring local optimas, is that schedules should be determined by sequentially, first predetermining the batch size of the work that you want to do, calculating the lead times for each of those, assigning priorities, setting the schedule according to the lead times, and then adjusting the schedule after considering apparent capacity constraints, and then repeating the above 3 steps. So that unfortunately often results in a plan that is either not feasible, so you're going to commit to a due date that you practically cannot meet in execution, or it's going to cause you to overcommit and get you to quote a much longer lead time that was theoretically possible. So just a few summaries of some of the counterintuitive insights here. Since phase A or project A is the critical path here, intuitively we assume that we should give priority when resolving the resource contention to the critical path, but that would have resulted in the longest duration. Since phase C is the shortest path, counterintuitively giving highest priority to that one gives us the shortest planned duration. And the difference between the best and the worst is a whopping 68%. And the flow efficiency, which is essentially how much time on that schedule am I losing because of avoidable delays. The best case, I'm getting a flow efficiency of 60%. So the projects are almost never waiting for non-bottleneck resources versus 35% in the case of the worst case schedule. So I hope that was valuable. It's an interesting example, very interesting example to show how important scheduling really is in real life conditions. Of course, with our project portfolio digital twin, we can then add in all the expected variability at the task level, put in unplanned events, and then not just test these schedules in terms of what gives me the shortest theoretical planned lead time, but to test them in reality to see which schedule overall, if I run thousands of replications, considering the natural variability at the task duration, which schedule will overall give me the best outcome, which is the best to absorb unplanned events, etc. And that's really the power of the digital twins, is being able to answer all these questions that you simply cannot answer with Excel or with traditional scheduling planning systems. If you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me via direct messaging or via my email, alan@Goldratt Research Labs. If you found this video valuable, please like it and share it and let me know your comments. Thank you.